2 tremendous hours with 4 amazing conversations with leaders, and we're going to dive into the next half hour here with Matt Tenney. I want to reintroduce my co-host, Karin Hurt, the founder and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. I'm also still speaking with John Stahl-Wert, and John is a speaker and consultant and the author of a book coming in February 2015, The Serving Leader, with his co-author, Ken Jennings. In just a moment, to introduce Matt. In addition to being a new dad, Matt is also a social entrepreneur and the author of Serve to be Great, Leadership Lessons from a Prison, a Monastery, and a Boardroom. So Matt has had a lot of learning around what it means to be serving. He's also a keynote speaker, a trainer, and a consultant. He makes his home in Nashville, Tennessee. And Matt, we're so thrilled that you could join us on this topic of servant leadership. And I'm guessing that you're meeting Karin and John both for the first time, so this is going to be a really interesting conversation, I'm sure. So Karin, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll be back at the end of the half hour.
Okay, thanks so much, Becky. So just to start, I'm curious how you came to discover the concept of servant leadership, and we can start with either one of you.
Matt, jump in.
All right, thank you, John. I would imagine with most of the panelists that you all have had today, you've got these wonderful stories of people leading large organizations with great success. My introduction to servant leadership actually was as a result of the greatest failure of my life. So if you'd like more detail on that, I'm happy to share. But I would love to say that it was something that came about, through repeated successes, but it was actually as a result of my greatest failure.
Wow. Thank you.
I'd like to underscore what Matt just said. So in my own case, I was in a program as a young adult. I was still a teenager when I was in an urban studies program in which Robert Greenleaf's landmark book was the required text. This was back in 1977, and I was just transformed by reading Greenleaf's work and then spending decades trying to grow into it. Our great job as leaders is to grow up, and that's a slow process, to be sure. My experience with leaders is that the encounter with servant leadership or serving leadership is usually the product of pain and failure. And this is what Matt just said. There's a certain kind of impervious, sure of himself, sure of herself leader that isn't really ready to take on servant leadership yet because they haven't fallen on their face and they haven't run off the end of themselves or ran into the wall. And it's fantastic to have a leader whose idea doesn't come to pass the way they thought it would, who becomes introspective about that, rather than to become bitter or even more deaf. And I see leaders come to forks in the road where they run into difficulty and they go left, which is I don't want to hurt anymore, and so I'm going to get harder, or they go to the right, which is I need to understand what I'm doing better, and I need the resources of honesty and candor and learning, and I need to take feedback, and that's the path to becoming a great servant leader. Congratulations, Matt, for whatever that trip and fall was. Way to go.
Thank you, John.
Yes, what doesn't kill us should make us stronger if we let it, right? So
yeah, I think it was. Oh, go ahead, Karin.
I'm sorry, Matt.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I'm curious how you each live out servant leadership in your own life and in your own work.
Well, so I'm working on. I'm at the helm of an enterprise called the Center for Serving Leadership, and I've been teaching executives in cohorts for years, and I've been at the head of a company that has this right in the title, and I've often thought about the difficulty of that because I have colleagues who listen to what I say. When we're in the room, tomorrow I'll be in the room with 17 executives in the eastern part of Pennsylvania going through a day of work in serving leadership, and this is what I do. One of the ways that I have found it necessary to live into this is to throw the door wide open to true, candid conversation with me by the people who work with me. So that, and by the way, I'm also married 35 years, and I'm married to a very bright, very thoughtful woman who also hears what I say and then has some things to say about how I live. And I don't think we become great serving leaders without accepting, without listening. Cheryl Batchelder said it in the last hour. So one of the ways I work at this is to try to be a growing man and a growing father and a growing husband and a growing boss. And in order to do that, I have to really pay attention to the people that I impact.
Nice. Matt, what would you add?
Very similar, actually. In fact, I was listening in to the conversation with John and Cheryl, and Cheryl mentioned one of the things that I think is extremely important for anyone who really sees the value of being a servant leader and wants to do it. And this is what I try to apply in my own life as well, but is to measure. Of course, there's the ancient cliched business axiom that if something isn't measured, it just simply doesn't get done. So as John mentioned, I try to measure in pretty precise ways,
yeah.
With the people that I work with, whether it's the full-time employee on my team or the contractors that I work with or the clients that I work with, trying to always get feedback on, am I doing the things that I know I should be doing from your perspective? Because from my perspective, I may think that I'm doing pretty well. I think I'm kind of hardwired to be to think pretty highly of myself, and maybe that's pretty common, I would imagine, for type A people. So to get that objective view from somebody else, I think is really important. So for me, there's kind of three main aspects. One is knowing that this is what makes not only business life more successful, but life in general. This is what makes life truly rich, is when we really balance the legitimate needs of others with our own legitimate needs, and we're not looking at our own short-term wants and desires and putting those ahead of the legitimate needs of the people around us. So really making sure that that's a priority, finding just what I call tripwires to remind myself to be thinking in that way, to be reflecting on how I can do better. Like, for instance, I think John mentioned that with his clients, it's often something where he recommends having reminders on a calendar. I actually do that very thing, and I do it the first thing in the day before I open up email or work on any projects. Is I take a few minutes to think, what could I be doing to better serve the people that I interact with every day? So that's kind of the highest level, is just reminding myself in a broad sense of what's really important, reminding myself of why it's important. The second broad tactic is to measure those things frequently. And then the third, I think, which kind of stems out of that, is I prioritize training what I think is the most important element of being a servant leader, which to me is being able to step out of our own shoes and understanding somebody else's perspective. So going into an interaction not with a preset idea of what I want to get out of it or what I hope to achieve, but more with the idea of, I want to really understand what the other person needs. And I know that over the long term, if I do that consistently, I'm going to end up achieving what I want to achieve. And I enjoy the journey much more. So I actually take quite a bit of time every day to formally train to develop skills like empathy and listening skills and self-awareness. And that's kind of what I focus on with my clients, is how do we close the gap between wanting to be a servant leader and taking practical steps to train every day in ways that science suggests can actually change our brain in ways that help us to be better listeners, more empathetic, and have better self-awareness. So I try to do that, and I do it every day. Some days more than others. After being in the hospital for the last few days, I don't think I trained as much as I could have. But generally speaking, that's something I try to do very consistently.
And one other comment that Matt's comments prompt me to say, if I may. How do we become better serving leaders? There's an outside part of that question. There's an inside part of that question. And the outside part, at the Center for Serving Leadership, we work at this through behaviors. We have a metric we use that was built by British researcher David Maister, who's written a variety of books on the impact of certain leadership behaviors on results. And so we use his what's called profit environment that tests leadership behaviors, serving leadership behaviors against the results that they're getting. But then there's the inside part, harder to talk about: heart, character, courage, how do we handle our pain? And we have to grow on both of these. We have to grow on the exterior side of our leadership behaviorally, but we also have to grow on the inside of our person. And so I'm just finishing right now a book that follows the serving leader, in which I'm laying out a methodology for how do we grow up as human beings, so that we have the fiber, the courage, the candor, the humility, the strength to handle it on the inside, because it's very hard to paste the behaviors of servant leadership onto a hard heart or a fragile ego. It's very hard. We have to learn how to grow the interior of our life as leaders as well.
Good, thank you. So this question is particularly timely, Matt, given your recent opinion, which is, you know, when Greenleaf talked about servant leadership in his original work, he was focusing more that you need to be about 19 years old to really begin to foster these behaviors, which I've always found fascinating, because I really believe we've got to teach servant leadership to our children very deliberately, as deliberately as we would take them to piano lessons or to soccer camp. And so I'm curious as to your perspective on that. How do we develop the values and the behaviors as early as possible in our children?
Well, I think Greenleaf was actually being a little bit conservative on his estimate. I think from my very basic understanding of neuroscience, I think for women that may be true. 19 might be when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed and we can really start developing these where we're fully able to live these traits every day. With males, as I understand it, it's usually not fully developed until about age 25. So we do, to some degree, lack the hardware, so to speak, to be able to live this path of servant leadership to the degree that we might like. But as you mentioned, that doesn't mean that there are not things that we can do. And interestingly, I don't remember the exact study that Adam Grant cited, but I'm sure many of you are aware of a wonderful professor at Wharton named Adam Grant, who wrote a wonderful book called Give and Take. And he's just a fantastic human being that it's pretty much all he's doing is just research on, you know, how do we do these things that we want to do at a higher level. And one of the things, he actually wrote an article just about this, and as you might intuit, the absolute most important thing that we can do is, in my opinion, it's the exact most important thing that we can do if we're leading a team of adults as well, which is lead by example. We have to show up every day to the greatest extent that we can, living the values that we want to see in our organization and living the behaviors that are evidence of those values. And I think with children it's no different. And in fact, the research that Adam Grant cited suggested that was exactly the case. And again, I don't remember the exact study, but the basic idea was, and I'm sure you could find it quite readily just with a quick Google search. But the basic idea was that parents who routinely stated that children should behave in a certain way or do certain things or live certain values, but did not do those things themselves, they were actually, of course, as you would intuit, the results were not good. The children did not follow the guidance. In fact, the parents who lived the values day after day to a significantly higher level and never said anything actually did better than the parents who said to do these things but didn't live them. So I think almost this sense of inauthenticity actually corrupted the child to make them not want to live up to the values that we'd like them to live. Now, of course, this isn't saying that we shouldn't combine verbal guidance with with our actions, but I found it striking that parents that never said anything but lived the values actually had better results raising their children than parents who talked a whole lot but never lived the values.
Nice, thank you. John, how about you? What's your perspective on this?
Well, I completely agree with what Matt said, and to take it from the family back to business for a second, and then I'll bring it back. I mentioned David Maister, whose research out of the UK between 5 and 25 years ago. One of his best books, really worth taking a look at, Matt, is called Practice What You Preach. He went into several hundred work sites, dozens of industries, and did management and leadership assessments, tracking servant leadership behaviors as seen by the followers of managers, and then looking at the impact of those behaviors on the results of the company, and in fact, profit. It's a remarkable piece of research that he did, and we use that methodology in our assessment work. And after all of that, Maister titled the book that captures it, Practice What You Preach. I think the issue of authenticity, of endeavoring to become what we declare, is a core human requirement or challenge. I often say to leaders that our work of becoming great leaders bears more resemblance to the maturity process than it does to the learning process. There's a growing up we need to do, and so we need to recognize the gap between what we say and what we do. That requires some humility, and our ears have to work. And then we have to be willing to step in and work at that. I have a client who went through the serving leader development work that we do at the Center for Serving Leadership, and at the end of it, his wife said, you know, your employees, they really love you, and they love coming to work, and they do great work. And she said, do you really understand what you're doing at work? And he said, yeah. He said, you know, I do. I've come to understand what I'm supposed to do at work so that people can grow and results can be delivered. And she was quiet for a second, and then she said, could you do it at home? And this is a tremendous leader. And he said, you know, in fact, I heard the story from both of them, and he said, you know, I hadn't connected the dots before. And he went back into his family with young children and built a serving leader methodology for a family with kids down to 2 years of age, and that's where we need to start in order to transform our view and our practice of leadership. So you're right on the doorstep, Matt, and congratulations for the new baby.
Thank you. And in fact, I would like to add one more thing to that specific segment, just because, you know, I think we might see this slide, how can we teach servant leadership to our children? And, you know, if we're running a business, we may think, what does that have to do with running my business? And I would say it has a lot to do with how we run our business, because the behaviors that are what really drive servant leadership are emotional behaviors. And I think that there is a predominant consensus in the psychology world, the behavioral sciences world, and neuroscience world, that all of these things are learned through what's called implicit learning. So, you know, you can read as many books as you want. If you don't practice the behaviors, you are not going to change your brain in ways that help you to elicit those behaviors.
Right.
But what's also a benefit about implicit learning is that if you practice at home, it makes you better at work, and vice versa. So the more that you can bring this into every area of your life, the more you benefit not only your business life, if that's very important to you, but also your personal life. And I think perhaps you know, as you were talking, John, and you just brought me back to my own situation here. As you probably noticed, I'm not in the office. I'm actually at home. You can see the carpet behind me. And that's because I want to be here for my wife if she needs something. You know, she could actually yell right now, and I could jump off of this call if I need to and help her out. Luckily, she's taking a nap along with the baby right now, so I think we're okay. But I think one of the best ways that I can show my son how to be a servant leader is to serve my wife, and let him see examples of me putting her needs at least equal to mine, if not above mine, and taking care of her, listening to her, not cutting her off, not just trying to fix her, but just being that example. I think with her And again, I don't remember this study, but there is some research that suggests that that's exactly the case. How spouses treat each other has a significant impact on how children will then want to behave with other people.
And I've watched that leaders who practice these behaviors over a lifetime and are growing leaders and build great companies increasingly realize that one of the metrics they have to pay attention to is the health of the families at home. I was talking with a client who's in the steel space, and one of the things he watches for in the steel industry, in this case most of his employees out in the plants are men, is women coming to him saying, you know, my husband's becoming a better man. And just to underscore your point, Matt, these aren't take them out of the box at work skills. This is life-on-life work we need to do. On a more humorous side of this, one of the things I've observed as I recruit executives to join cohorts around the country to go through this work, when I'm talking with an executive who's on the fence, you know, time is precious, and spending a number of days with me over half a year they need to know there's going to be a return on investment for that time because they're accountable and they're stewards of their time. If I know that that executive's spouse is a friend of the wife of someone I have served before, I feel pretty sure that we can close the deal, because one spouse talking to another about how home became better when work became better is a story I just see very, very commonly. And so, you know, Karin, it's work and home. It's all about the whole of our life. We can't turn it on and turn it off. This growing up process touches everything.
Nice. Okay, well, thank you both so much. We're going to bring Becky back now and have her invite some questions from our listeners.
Thanks so much. I have a question directed to Matt related to the daily practice that you mentioned. Tom is wondering if you could expand a little bit on that training that you do daily to improve your servant leadership capabilities.
Definitely. Yeah, it's the focus is on developing self-awareness. Because if you look at especially the framework for emotional intelligence, self-awareness is the foundational competency. It affects every other emotional intelligence competency, especially listening and especially empathy. So that's where I focus, and I use a practice that's becoming very popular now. I've been practicing and teaching since 2002, and back even then, not so long ago, this was not very common, but now I'm sure you've heard of the term mindfulness training or mindfulness practice, and it's actually much simpler than I think most people make it out to be. It's the way I like to look at it is it's something we're already doing. Many times every day we become aware of our own emotional state, our own thinking, but for most of us, we do that. Generally, it's unintentional, and it doesn't last for a very long period of time before we kind of snap back to just being that voice in our heads, talking to ourselves, judging, analyzing. So really, mindfulness training is just taking something that we already do, which is becoming self-aware, and making it an intentional effort, which we learn to sustain, we train to sustain for longer and longer periods of time. And the more that we can sustain it, the greater change it has in our brain, or the greater changes result in our brains that allow us to have those self-awareness skills, the listening skills, the empathy skills. So there are many, many books out there on the topic. One of my personal favorites is a book called Search Inside Yourself, which is based on the program that was started at Google. Very, very practical introduction to mindfulness. And actually my forthcoming book that's coming out in March goes very in-depth into how to just integrate that practice very seamlessly into daily life you don't have to add anything to your schedule. It's not like you have to, go add 30 minutes to your very busy life. You can just change the way you do things that you already do and see results in terms of how you develop those those competencies.
And Matt, what's the title of your latest book that's coming in March of 2015?
It's called The Mindfulness Edge, How to Rewire Your Brain for Leadership and Personal Excellence Without Adding to Your Schedule.
Thanks, Matt.
Sure.
Little bit of a plug there for your new book.
Thank you.
I love this question from Cindy. She's wondering what a couple of key measures are that you can use to know if you're creating a culture of servant leadership in your organization? John, maybe you want to try that one first.
Sure. Maybe we can do this popcorn. One, if you sit down with people across your organization, you walk down the hall, walk out onto the shop floor, and ask them if they understand why their work matters. And if they have an answer to that question, you've done your job. I often say that if people come to work without having a sense of the purposefulness or meaningfulness of their work, it's a leadership failure. And so we teach very specific things that we have to do as leaders if our people are going to understand that their work matters. I'll give you an example. I work with a company over the years called Industrial Scientific. They're the world's leading manufacturer of gas detection safety equipment. And their vision, their purpose statement is to eliminate death on the job. The people of Industrial Scientific are dedicating their careers to eliminating death on the job in this century. And they do very specific things. This isn't just a sentiment. They do very specific things to help their people imagine, make personal, and make emotional the importance of doing outstanding work, so that when they're bent over a circuit board or whatever they're doing, they realize why it matters. And so one measure would be, and this will take some courage, find out if your people know why it matters that they come to work every day. And if they don't know that, then get intentional and purposeful about helping them make the connection between the work that they do and the difference that they're making in the world.
Thanks, John. Matt, any thoughts on key measures?
Yeah, I think that's a foundational. If people aren't connecting their work to a greater purpose, if they can't see how their daily tasks contribute to that, I think that's a significant failure to serve. And the converse is also true. If that connection is made, that's one of the most powerful things we can do to serve team members. But I would also add, measuring emotional competencies. There are many assessments out there that can do that. And I think, of course, we can get a subjective idea of whether culture is changing, but I wouldn't leave it to a subjective measure. I would find, very well designed assessments that have been used, by many people that, with good results, to measure very specific things like how well does a leader listen, how empathetic is a leader, how concerned is the leader that somebody's growing every single day. These things have to be measured very precisely and with regularity. And I think with that, if you're measuring, for instance, let's say every quarter, every 6 months at first, then you can start to see, okay, where are we growing and where are we not growing? And to be most specific, a lot of these assessments are 360, and of course, there's always some value to getting feedback from peers and seniors. But I truly believe if you're trying to develop a servant leader organization, the most important feedback you're going to get is how do direct reports report on the people, on their leader. So to me, that's what matters more than anything. We tend to focus on, we want to get promoted, and we think about, okay, I got to make sure I look good for my boss. I would say worry more about how well you're taking care of your team, and if you do that, you're probably going to look great in front of your boss. So that's where I think the money's really made, so to speak, is getting that precise feedback from team members, from direct reports, and then at the C-suite, if that's where the culture change is coming from, you can be measuring managers not only on their performance in the terms of the normal things that we measure in everyday business, but also how is that culture changing on their team? Are we seeing steady growth in terms of how they're perceived by their direct reports? And I wouldn't expect it to happen overnight. It's not going to. You can see some changes quickly, but I would expect you need to work at this for a good 18 months to 3 years before you're going to see, especially if the culture's been very anti-servant leader up to this point. But the payoff is tremendous. The investment of time and effort to grow a culture, as I'm sure you've heard from all the presenters before, the payoff is tremendous. It's worth the effort.
Thanks so much. So Matt and John, we're wrapping up this half hour with you. We have a couple of new guests coming on the line. Cheryl Batchelder is coming back, and Pat from the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership is also going to join us. So if you ladies can hear my voice, I'd love to invite you on camera. And Matt and John, as you sign off, I'd love to hear any closing thoughts from you. Just a reminder that we're here with John Stahl-Wert. He's the author of The Serving Leader, a new edition coming out in February of 2016. And Matt Tenney, the author of Serve to be Great, and a new book on mindfulness coming in March of 2016. So if the two of you have any closing remarks, and then we'll move into our next half hour.
Well, just thanks, Karin, and thanks, Becky, and Weaving Influence. You know, our life is rendered meaningful when we get to contribute something that is bigger than ourselves, and you're doing that. Really appreciate that you called this webinar together.
Thanks for joining us, John. Matt?
I echo those sentiments. Thank you very much, Becky, and thank you to, I think I saw the last email I got from you, Becky. There's about 700 people registered for this, so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to show and demonstrate how important this is to you, to get hopefully a few gems that help you take your capacity for servant leadership to a higher level. That is much appreciated as well.
And our final registration numbers, Matt, came in around 900, and we have had a tremendous number of people participating on the call today. So it's been a great day. Thanks for joining us, even in the midst of your busy life. Take good care.
Pat and Cheryl, I'm really looking forward to your conversation. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
So again, welcome Cheryl and Pat, and thanks to all of you who have been hanging in here with us. If you've been on since we started this webinar at 11:30 a.m., why don't you just tell me in the question box? I'd love to hear if we have any folks who have been with us for the entire time. A few housekeeping items for you if you are joining us new at the top of the half hour. This is the Online Servant Leadership Summit, and we have the hashtag SLS2015. If you're tweeting live, we would love to have you tweet the thoughts that are coming from Cheryl and Pat in this next half hour. And oh my goodness, there are a lot of people who have been here the whole time. It's just scrolling faster than you can imagine, and thanks to all of you for hanging in there with us. And I'm really thrilled for this last conversation. Did anybody notice it's all women on the line right now? So anyhow, that's fun. So I want to, again, thank my co-host today, Karin Hurt, the founder and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders and an awesome keynote speaker. And her book, Winning Well, is coming in 2016. I think I keep saying 2015 for everything. I'm just not ready for the new year. Again, we have with us Cheryl Batchelder. She's the CEO of Popeyes and the author of Dare to Serve. And we have Pat. And Pat, I'm afraid of getting your last name wrong, so I'm going to let you say your last name. But Pat is the CEO of the Robert K. Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. And for those of you who are not familiar with the center, it was founded in 1964 by Robert Greenleaf. And the center advances the philosophy and practice of servant leadership. Pat joined the center just in the past year or so after having a career as an executive in the corporate world, and maybe we'll hear more about that on this call. So I'm going to turn this over now to Karin, who will be talking with Pat and Cheryl, and I'll be back with you again at the end of the half hour. Thanks, ladies. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Oh, I want really fast. I want to give another shout out to the people who have had their groups. In Touch Ministries has a group that's been on since the beginning of the webinar. The U.S. EPA also has been on since the beginning of the webinar, and there's a group with Soulology that I saw commenting earlier, and their group has been on the whole time. The group at Apple on the whole time. So thanks to those of you in organizations who are investing in your people to learn about servant leadership with us today.
Great. So Robert Greenleaf created the BEST test, and could you explain the BEST test to our listeners?
Sure, Karin. And I'll pronounce my last name for Becky. It's Filatico, and I can understand why you choose not to try it, because even when I go to the airport and they're looking for somebody to match that name to do the baggage check, they just say, Miss Pat, so I respond. So when Robert Greenleaf wrote the essay, The Servant as Leader, he gave us the BEST test in that very first publication. And what he said is the BEST test, and I heard John say this earlier when he was talking with Cheryl, is do people grow? do they grow as persons while they're being served? And he talked about that in terms of healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to be servants. So he gave us a pretty hard bar to reach consistently as a servant leader.
Terrific, thank you. So I'm curious, have you always led this way, or has this been an evolution throughout your careers?
Well, I'll start by saying it was definitely an evolution and then eventually a revolution in my thinking. I used to joke when I was young that my leadership philosophy was think like a man, act like a lady, and work like a dog. People always laughed, but I now look back on that as a pretty superficial response. But after some school of hard knocks in leadership roles, I think I started taking more seriously my approach to leadership and started reading and studying the approaches that mesh both with my values and what I believe to be the best path to performance. Similar to Matt on the last half hour, I didn't really become highly convicted about servant leadership till I personally had faced failure in the marketplace. Getting fired from a pretty high-profile job that I thought was going to be my capstone of my career. That humbling experience led me to explore a humble approach to leadership, which doesn't mean doormat. It simply means thinking of others as more significant than yourself.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. How about Pat? How about you?
Yeah, and I appreciated Cheryl's comments as well as Matt's in facing a situation that caused you to reevaluate. Quite honestly, I grew up in a command and control culture. In corporate America, that's the way we learned to manage, not necessarily to lead, but to manage people and to get what you needed to get out of people. I think over the course of my career, actually the one very early epiphany came when my husband was asking me a question about my day, and I was saying, well, I was really frustrated. I wasn't getting what I needed out of my people, and I said, he just won't do it the right way. And my husband said, well, what's the right way? I said, well, of course, it's my way. And he said, yeah, maybe not. So sometimes out of not the most obvious places, you get a flash of the obvious. And I learned that the best way to get things out of people, get the best performance out of people, was really to understand what was important to them and help them achieve that.
Great, thank you. So what do you see as the biggest barriers to serving well?
Ourselves.
Yes.
There is, I've come to really think that our thinking around the word humility really trips us up in this case. As I was saying a couple minutes ago, most of us think a humble leader would be a soft-spoken, no opinions, no ambitions person who just went around giving everybody hugs. And that is not the definition of servant leadership. We just heard Pat talk about the test that Greenleaf gave us. I actually do a slight paraphrase on that. But the question I ask is, are the people better off today, right now, because of my leadership? And if they're not, what's in the way of that? What's in the way of that? That idea that all day long you might ask, how does your decision impact others, is a powerful game-changing thing. And many times it changes my decision. If I'm in a room with angry franchisees who don't think we're doing something right, my first response might be, well, the heck with you, I'm going to get angry too. But if I can catch myself and say, are the people better off because of my leadership, I might think to say, tell me more. What's the problem? How can we do a better job? And listen first and seek to understand before having that, leader as king kind of response that we are inclined to have. We're human beings. We're inclined to think of ourselves first.
Nice. Thank you.
The piece that I would add to that is we are all so busy now, and we've got, in many cases, in Cheryl's world, in the world I used to be in, quarterly objectives where there is a scorecard that is out there, and we've got to meet that scorecard. So we are running. We're running so fast that just to take the time to stop and instead of tell, teach. Instead of giving fast, off-the-cuff reactions, really question to understand. And I think more and more we learn that if we teach, if we enable, if we help people grow, we're going to be a heck of a lot more productive at the end of the day than if we just constantly be handing out instructions to people. They never learn that way. They have to come back for the instruction again, and productivity goes through the floor. So I think at the end of the day, it's just understanding that if we slow down and take 2 steps back, we're going to make many, many giant leaps forward.
Terrific. Pat, on the screen here, for those of us who, if you can see the slides, you've got this concentric circle model. I'm curious, can you walk us through this, what this is all about?
Well, I actually heard many of your speakers talking about this. In fact, Matt was stressing some of that just earlier. It's the self-awareness, it's the empathy. These are some of the words that Greenleaf gave us, and you've seen them show up in 10 attributes and 7 pillars and very many different manifestations. But when we talk to folks, we're talking about, the idea of a servant leader having responsibility first and foremost to strengthen themselves, then to build those relationships with others, and then their responsibility from an organizational perspective. And that's the set of ideas that we put forward here when we have some conversations. One of the things we talked about might be interesting to know is where are we in terms of working on these things? Matt talked about it a little bit ago, the mindfulness and being self-aware and being able to train himself every day. I love the self-awareness point because what Greenleaf told us about self-awareness is that it's not enough just to know about yourself, but you need to know about the impact you're having on others. You can't change each other, but you need to be able to stretch enough so that you can connect. And I think that is the power of a model like this that reminds us, doesn't teach us, it reminds us that these are important elements in all the relationships we have. And I think, Karen, we did come up with one poll.
Okay.
So you all have been listening for all of these hours, and think about what is the one thing that you need to do to grow as a servant leader. What would be the top of your list? And if you can pick one, that would be terrific. We'll gather that from the group.
And I'm unmuting for a moment because I can see the results, the poll coming in, and I don't know that Karen can. So thanks to you who are answering. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. The highest priority attribute I must strengthen to grow as a servant leadership is, and you have the chance to select self-awareness, listening, persuading, empathy, or foresight. Lots of answers coming in. I think did everybody's camera disappear while we're doing the poll?
Yeah, Becky, mine did too.
Yeah,
So
we will all come. Yeah, when I close the poll, we'll all come back on camera.
Okay, good.
It looks like about half of our participants have voted. I'm going to give just a few more seconds, and then we can show those results.
There we are.
Let's take a look at those results together.
Oh,
Pat, can you see them?
I can see them.
I would love to hear your comments on those results.
So with the groups that I have worked with, most of the time I ask them to verbalize the one that they're going to go work on most. And the winner is typically the winner today, listening. 27% of our folks out here saying listening is something we have to work on. I know I have to work on it. There's lots of different programs that we can use, but I just think it's one of those things that we have to remind ourselves to take a break, to take a step away from the computer, put the technology down, and just listen, not judge, ask good questions, and as Greenleaf told us, practice silence.
Thanks, Pat. I think our cameras and our slides are both back.
Yes. Great. So my final question for you is, what continues to compel and motivate you to serve others?
for me, it's become just a heartfelt passion that this is a better leadership approach, better for the people, better for the enterprise, and better for performance. And once you come to that conviction, you're a convert and you become an evangelist. And I want to be an evangelist to help the next generation of leaders lead more effectively than my own cohort did. I grew up in the age of leaders who embarrassed me, to be frank, whose leadership has been self-absorbed, and the outcomes have been poor for the people and for the enterprise, whether it was just kind of bad, or whether it was all the way to fraud and some very serious bad behavior. And so I just get excited to come to work in the morning thinking I'm just one person in one position, but I want to be on the team of people developing a better cohort of next generation leaders.
Well, it definitely comes through. You do sound and feel like someone who with a deep conviction in this.